The tires screeched, and a luxury car swerved to a stop on the gravel road. Marcus froze as the driver, a man in an expensive suit, scrambled out, his face red with frustration. The young boy's eyes widened as he realized the man wasn't just any ordinary traveler. He was Michael Benson, the billionaire entrepreneur whose face had been plastered on every billboard in town. Marcus had never seen someone like him up close. "Kid, I need help," Mr. Benson said, glancing nervously at his watch. "I'm late for a meeting that could cost millions. I have a flat tire, and there's no signal out here. Can you fix it?" Marcus hesitated. He was only 13, and though he'd helped his uncle fix tires at their small repair shop, he had never worked on a car like this. Still, he nodded, stepping closer. As he knelt beside the sleek, black car, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would change his life forever. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. As Marcus tightened the last bolt on the new tire, a black SUV roared up the road and skidded to a stop. The doors flew open, and 3 masked men jumped out, brandishing weapons. "Step away from the car," one of them barked, pointing directly at Marcus. It had all started that morning when Marcus left his small home on the edge of town. The day seemed ordinary. He waved goodbye to his mother, who was preparing akara to sell at the local market, and headed out to the repair shop where his uncle worked. Marcus liked spending his Saturdays there. He loved tinkering with machines, dreaming of the day he could afford to own a car of his own, or even just ride in one. "Marcus," his uncle had called out as he adjusted the engine of an old truck, "run to the market and grab me some brake fluid." With a cheerful nod, Marcus set off, the dusty road crunching under his feet. The market was bustling, as always, with vendors shouting about their goods and children chasing each other through the narrow paths between stalls. He grabbed the bottle of brake fluid and started heading back when he heard the unmistakable sound of a car struggling on the nearby road. Curiosity got the better of him. Slipping through the trees lining the road, Marcus saw the sleek black car, its hazard lights blinking. The man pacing beside it looked completely out of place on this rural stretch. His suit was too sharp, his watch too shiny, and his frustration too obvious. "Need help?" Marcus called, surprising even himself with his boldness. That was how it began. Mr. Benson, after a moment's hesitation, had waved him over, offering to pay him if he could help replace the flat tire. Marcus had jumped at the chance. He didn't care about the money. The car itself was mesmerizing. He worked quickly and efficiently, his fingers moving with the confidence of someone twice his age. "Where'd you learn to do this?" Mr. Benson asked, watching him. "My uncle taught me," Marcus replied, not looking up. "We run a repair shop in town." "Smart kid," Mr. Benson said, glancing at his watch again. "Keep going. I've got a boardroom waiting for me in the city." It was while Marcus was finishing up that the black SUV arrived. "Step away from the car," the masked man repeated, louder this time. His voice was rough, like he wasn't used to talking much. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He glanced at Mr. Benson, who looked pale but tried to remain calm. The billionaire raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "We don't want any trouble," Mr. Benson said, his voice steady. "Take whatever you want." The man in the middle, clearly the leader, pointed at the car. "Pop the trunk." Marcus and Mr. Benson exchanged a glance. Marcus could tell the trunk held something important, something Mr. Benson didn't want these men to find. "Do it," the leader growled. Mr. Benson hesitated. "It's just luggage." The man lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by the arm. "Open it, or the kid gets hurt." Marcus's pulse thundered in his ears as he felt the grip tighten on his arm. He was scared, but he didn't cry out. He looked at Mr. Benson, silently pleading for him to act. All right, Mr. Benson said quickly, fumbling for the key fob. He pressed a button, and the trunk popped open with a soft click. The men hurried to the back of the car, shoving Marcus aside. He stumbled but caught himself, his eyes darting to Mr. Benson. The billionaire gave him a subtle shake of the head, silently telling him not to run. Marcus stayed put, his mind racing with possible escape plans. The men rifled through the trunk, pulling out a sleek black briefcase. The leader opened it, revealing stacks of cash and a small, locked compartment. "This is it," the leader said, smirking beneath his mask. "Let's go." As the men turned to leave, one of them glanced back at Marcus. "You didn't see anything, kid. Got it?" Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. He wanted to say something, to shout for help, but fear kept his lips sealed. The SUV roared to life and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. Mr. Benson stood frozen for a moment before pulling out his phone. "Still no signal," he muttered, looking at Marcus. "Are you okay?" Marcus nodded, though his legs felt like jelly. What was that?" Mr. Benson sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Trouble," he said grimly. "A lot of trouble." But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the briefcase. What was inside that small compartment? And why did those men seem so determined to get it? Before he could ask, Mr. Benson straightened. "Come with me. I'll get you home safely." Marcus hesitated, his instincts telling him this wasn't over. And he was right. This was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change his life forever. As the dust from the SUV settled, Marcus and Mr. Benson climbed into the luxury car. Marcus stared out of the window, still shaken by the events. His hands trembled in his lap, and his thoughts raced. He didn't know what to say, but he had a sinking feeling that whatever had just happened wasn't over. Mr. Benson gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. His calm demeanor from earlier had cracked, revealing an edge of nervousness. He glanced at Marcus. "You're a brave kid. You know that?" Marcus didn't feel brave. He felt small and scared. Who were those men? What did they want? Mr. Benson sighed deeply. "Let's just say, they work for people who don't like losing." That briefcase was supposed to stay hidden. "What's in the briefcase?" Marcus asked before he could stop himself. Mr. Benson's lips pressed into a thin line. "Money. Documents. Things they shouldn't have." Marcus wanted to ask more, but the tone in Mr. Benson's voice warned him to stay quiet. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, which seemed to stretch endlessly into the countryside. They drove for several minutes in silence before Mr. Benson's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "No signal earlier, but now they're calling," he muttered, answering the phone. "Yes? I know. It's gone." "No, I'm fine. There was a kid. He helped me." "Yes, I'm bringing him back now." "No, I haven't told him anything." Marcus couldn't help but feel uneasy. Whoever was on the other end of the line didn't sound happy. He tried to piece together what was happening, but felt like he was missing too many parts of the puzzle. When the call ended, Mr. Benson turned to Marcus. "What's your name, kid?" "Marcus." "Well, Marcus, I owe you one. If you hadn't stopped to help, I'd probably still be stranded out there, or worse." Marcus shrugged. "It's no big deal. I just did what anyone else would do." Mr. Benson smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how many people wouldn't." They passed through Marcus's small neighborhood, where children played barefoot on dusty streets and women sat in clusters, chatting while peeling yams. Mr. Benson slowed the car, clearly out of place in the rundown surroundings. "Where's your house?" he asked. Marcus pointed to a small, weathered building with a tin roof. The sight of it always embarrassed him, especially now, with someone as important as Mr. Benson sitting beside him. "Here," Marcus said quietly. Mr. Benson parked the car and stepped out with Marcus. The neighbors' heads turned, their curiosity piqued by the sight of the flashy car and the well-dressed stranger. Marcus's mother, who had been sweeping the front yard, dropped her broom in shock. "Marcus, what is going on?" she demanded, her eyes darting between her son and Mr. Benson. "Ma'am, your son helped me out of a tough spot," Mr. Benson said, extending a hand. "I'm Michael Benson." Her jaw dropped slightly. "You mean the Michael Benson?" He nodded. "Yes, and I owe Marcus a great deal. He's a remarkable young man." Marcus's mother didn't know what to say. She ushered them inside, offering Mr. Benson a seat on their worn-out sofa. She apologized for the state of their home, but Mr. Benson waved it off, assuring her he'd seen worse. Marcus sat quietly, feeling awkward as his mother bombarded Mr. Benson with questions. "What happened? Why was Marcus with you?" she asked. Mr. Benson kept his explanation vague, mentioning only the flat tire and Marcus's quick thinking. He didn't say a word about the men with the guns or the stolen briefcase. Marcus noticed but said nothing. After a while, Mr. Benson stood to leave. I should go, but I won't forget this. Marcus, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. He handed Marcus a sleek black business card with his name and contact information embossed in gold. It felt heavy in Marcus's hand, like a ticket to another world. Thank you, Marcus said, unsure what else to say. Mr. Benson nodded, then paused. One more thing, Marcus. Be careful who you talk to about today. Some people might misunderstand. The warning sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He nodded, clutching the card tightly. As Mr. Benson drove away, Marcus's mother turned to him. What really happened out there? Marcus hesitated. He wanted to tell her everything but decided against it. I just helped him fix his car, that's all. She didn't look convinced but let it go, turning her attention back to the Acura batter she'd been mixing before the interruption. Marcus pocketed the card, his mind racing with unanswered questions. That night, Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the image of the men in masks or the briefcase they'd stolen. Why had Mr. Benson been so secretive? And why did he seem so scared? Just as he began to drift off, a loud knock startled him. He sat up, his heart pounding. It was almost midnight, too late for visitors. The knock came again, more urgent this time. Marcus, his mother called from her room. Who is that at this hour? I don't know, he replied, his voice trembling. He crept to the window and peeked outside. Two men stood on the porch, their faces hidden in the shadows. One of them carried something heavy in his hand. A cold knot of fear formed in Marcus's stomach as the man knocked again, harder this time. Open up, one of them called. We need to talk to Marcus. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. How did they know his name? And what did they want? The sound of his mother's footsteps behind him made him turn. She was tying her wrapper tightly, preparing to open the door. Wait, Marcus whispered urgently. Don't open it. But it was too late. The men outside had heard them and weren't waiting anymore. The door burst open with a loud crash, sending splinters flying everywhere. Marcus stumbled back, his mind racing. The men stepped inside, their faces now fully visible in the dim light. They weren't masked this time, but their expressions were just as menacing. We warned you, kid, one of them said, his voice low and threatening. Now you're coming with us. Marcus's world spun. Everything felt like a nightmare. He turned to run, but the man closest to him grabbed his arm with a grip like iron. Let me go, Marcus shouted, struggling to break free. Quiet, the man hissed. You've seen too much. Marcus's mother lunged forward, trying to pull him away, but the second man shoved her back roughly. She hit the ground with a cry, and Marcus screamed. The men dragged Marcus toward the door, their intentions clear. Whatever they wanted, it wasn't good. And just like that, the world Marcus thought he knew was ripped away, leaving him to wonder if he'd ever see his home again. Marcus fought with everything he had, kicking, squirming, and yelling at the top of his lungs. His mother scrambled to her feet, desperation etched on her face as she hurled herself at the man dragging Marcus. She clawed at his arm, screaming, "Let him go. He's just a child." "Stay out of this, lady," the man growled, shoving her back again. This time, she hit the wall hard, collapsing with a pained cry. "Mom!" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking as panic overtook him. He managed to twist his body, his elbow catching the man in the stomach. The grip on his arm loosened slightly, and Marcus yanked himself free, stumbling backward into the corner of the room. The man cursed loudly and lunged for him again. Before Marcus could react, a blinding light flooded the room, followed by the sound of screeching tires outside. The men froze, their heads snapping toward the doorway. "What now?" one of them muttered. A car door slammed, and heavy footsteps approached the house. Marcus's heart pounded as a familiar voice called out, "Marcus, are you in there?" It was Mr. Benson. The men exchanged a look, their faces tense. One of them hissed, "This just got complicated." Without another word, they turned and bolted out the back door, disappearing into the night. Mr. Benson burst through the front door moments later, his face a mix of concern and anger. His sharp suit was slightly wrinkled, and his tie hung loose around his neck, but his presence was commanding. "Marcus, are you all right?" he asked, scanning the room. Marcus nodded shakily, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. They tried to take me." Mr. Benson's jaw tightened. He looked over at Marcus's mother, who was clutching her side and struggling to stand. He rushed to her, helping her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wavered. "Who were those men? Why did they come after my son?" Mr. Benson hesitated, his eyes darting to Marcus. "It's complicated, but I'll explain everything. First, we need to get somewhere safe. They might come back." The next hour was a blur. Mr. Benson insisted they leave the house immediately. He helped Marcus's mother gather a few essentials before guiding them to his car. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and confusion as they sped away from the neighborhood, the headlights cutting through the darkness. "Where are we going?" Marcus's mother asked, her voice tinged with both fear and suspicion. "To a safe house," Mr. Benson replied. "It's a secure location where no one will find us." "A safe house?" Marcus echoed. "Why do we need a safe house? What's going on?" Mr. Benson sighed, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Marcus, you helped me earlier today, and I owe you more than I can say. But that briefcase the men took, it contains something dangerous. They think you might know something, or worse, that you're involved." "But I don't," Marcus protested. "I don't know anything about it." "I know," Mr. Benson said quickly, "but these men don't care. They're ruthless, and they won't stop until they're sure you're not a threat." Marcus's mother shook her head, her voice rising with frustration. "My son is just a boy. He doesn't deserve to be dragged into this madness." "I agree," Mr. Benson said firmly. "That's why I'm doing everything I can to protect you both." They drove in silence for what felt like hours, eventually pulling up to a gated compound on the outskirts of the city. The area was heavily wooded, and the only sound was the hum of the car's engine. A security guard opened the gate, nodding to Mr. Benson as they entered. The house inside the compound was nothing like Marcus had ever seen. It was sleek and modern, with glass walls and sharp angles. Mr. Benson led them inside, where a small team of men and women in suits were already waiting. "This is Marcus and his mother," Mr. Benson said, introducing them. "They're under my protection. Make sure they have everything they need." The team sprang into action, ushering Marcus and his mother to a comfortable sitting area. A woman in a black suit offered them water and assured them they were safe. Marcus's mother looked skeptical, but she didn't argue. As they settled in, Mr. Benson sat across from them, his expression serious. "It's time I told you the truth." Marcus and his mother leaned in, their attention fully on him. "That briefcase the men stole," he began, "contained evidence of illegal activities tied to some very powerful people. It was meant to expose them and bring them to justice. But now that it's in their hands, they'll do everything they can to cover their tracks, including coming after anyone who knows about it." Marcus's stomach turned. "But I don't know anything. I was just helping you fix your tire." "I know," Mr. Benson said, "but they saw you with me. That's enough for them to see you as a threat." "What about the evidence?" Marcus's mother asked. "Can't you just tell the authorities?" Mr. Benson hesitated. "The authorities might already be compromised. That's why I can't trust anyone outside this team." Marcus felt like the room was spinning. He was just a kid from a small town, and now he was caught up in something way over his head. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Mr. Benson leaned forward, his eyes serious. "Now, we keep you safe while we figure out our next move. But Marcus, you have to trust me. No matter what happens, I'll make sure you're all right." That night, Marcus lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The events of the day replayed in his mind like a broken record. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life would never be the same. Just as his eyes began to close, a soft tapping sound caught his attention. He sat up, straining to listen. The sound came again, this time louder, a rhythmic knock on the glass wall of the room. Heart pounding, Marcus crept to the window and pulled back the curtain. His breath hitched. Outside, in the shadows, a figure stood watching him. The dim light of the moon revealed the man's face. It was one of the attackers from earlier. Before Marcus could react, the man raised a finger to his lips, signaling him to stay quiet. Then, he pointed to the door, his meaning clear. "Come outside," the man mouthed. Marcus froze, fear rooting him to the spot. But as the man's expression darkened, Marcus realized he didn't have much choice. Marcus's breath quickened as he backed away from the window. His heart raced, but his mind spun even faster. Should he scream? Run? Or do as the man outside was silently demanding? He glanced toward the door, where a faint sliver of light crept in from the hallway. Somewhere in the house, Mr. Benson and his team were probably still awake. But the figure outside raised a hand, palm open, in what seemed like a signal of reassurance. The man mouthed again, slower this time. "No one else. Just you." Marcus shook his head and took another step back. This was a bad idea. A very bad idea. But the man outside reached into his pocket and pulled something out. It gleamed faintly in the moonlight, a phone. He tapped the screen, and a picture appeared. Marcus squinted, his stomach turning to ice when he recognized the image. It was his mother. She was sitting in the living room, sipping water. It was taken just minutes ago. The man outside tilted his head, daring Marcus to ignore him. Swallowing hard, Marcus made his decision. He tiptoed to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. He cast one last glance toward the hallway, hoping, praying, that someone would come to stop him. But the house was eerily silent. With a deep breath, he opened the door and stepped outside. The man wasted no time. He grabbed Marcus's arm firmly, but not harshly, and led him into the shadows. Marcus's head swiveled nervously, scanning for any sign of Mr. Benson's guards, but it was as if they'd all disappeared. "What do you want?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling of leaves. The man didn't answer right away. He guided Marcus around the side of the house to where a black car idled, its engine so quiet it was almost imperceptible. The back doors swung open, and Marcus found himself face to face with a man he hadn't seen before. His face was older, his hair silver, and his eyes sharp and calculating. "Get in," the older man said, his voice calm but commanding. Marcus hesitated, his legs rooted to the ground. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on." The older man chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "You've got guts, kid. I'll give you that. But let me make this simple for you. If you don't get in this car, your mother won't be safe. Do you understand?" The weight of the man's words hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. He glanced back toward the house, then at the man who had dragged him here. The guard's expression was blank, unreadable, but Marcus could feel the threat radiating from him. Reluctantly, Marcus climbed into the car. The older man smiled thinly and gestured for the door to be closed. The vehicle began moving almost immediately, gliding down the gravel driveway and onto the open road. The interior of the car was luxurious but intimidating. Marcus sat stiffly, his hands clenched into fists on his lap. The older man observed him for a moment before speaking. "You don't know who I am, do you?" he asked. Marcus shook his head. "Should I?" The man smirked. "Probably not. My name is Victor Kane. I'm what you might call a problem solver. More like a problem maker," Marcus muttered under his breath. Kane chuckled. "Touché. But I'm here to solve a very specific problem. Your involvement in something that doesn't concern you." "I didn't ask to be involved," Marcus shot back. "I was just helping Mr. Benson fix his car." "And look where that got you," Kane said, his tone darkening. "You stumbled into a world you don't belong in. But now you're here, and there are consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking slightly. Kane leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking onto Marcus. "The kind that depend on how cooperative you are. My associates want answers. What you know, what you've seen, and who you've talked to." "I don't know anything," Marcus said quickly. "I didn't see what was in the briefcase, and I don't know why those men wanted it. I swear." Kane studied him for a long moment before leaning back with a sigh. "Maybe you're telling the truth. Maybe you're not. Either way, you're coming with us until we're sure." The car ride stretched on, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine. Marcus's mind raced, searching for a way out. He thought of Mr. Benson, of his mother, of the business card still in his pocket. If he could just get a chance to call for help. The car slowed as they approached a rundown warehouse on the edge of town. It looked abandoned, the windows shattered and the walls covered in graffiti. Marcus's stomach churned as he realized this was where they planned to keep him. The car stopped, and Kane opened his door. Out. Marcus hesitated, but knew better than to resist. He climbed out of the car, his eyes darting around for any sign of escape. Two more men appeared from the shadows, both burly and menacing. They flanked Marcus, ensuring he wouldn't run. Inside, the warehouse was just as bleak as the outside. The air smelled of rust and mildew, and the only light came from a few dim bulbs hanging from the ceiling. Kane gestured for Marcus to sit on a metal chair in the center of the room. "Let's make this simple," Kane said, circling Marcus like a predator. "Who else knows about today?" "No one," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "I didn't tell anyone. Not even Benson?" Kane pressed. Marcus hesitated. "Well, he was there." Kane's expression hardened. "You're not lying to me, are you, kid? Because if you are, you won't like what happens next." "I'm not lying," Marcus insisted, his voice rising. "I don't know anything. I didn't tell anyone." Kane stared at him for a moment longer before stepping back. "We'll see. Keep him here," he instructed the guards. "And make sure he doesn't do anything stupid." As Kane walked away, Marcus's heart sank. He was trapped, and the chances of getting out seemed slimmer by the second. But as the door slammed shut behind Kane, Marcus noticed something. One of the guards had a small radio clipped to his belt, and from where Marcus sat, he could hear faint static. If he could just get to it, maybe, just maybe, he could call for help. But how? And more importantly, who would hear him? Marcus's heart raced as his eyes locked on the small radio clipped to the guard's belt. It was his only chance, slim as it was. The two guards stood a few feet away, chatting quietly and occasionally glancing at him. He needed a plan, a distraction, something that would give him the opportunity to act without them noticing. His mind raced, scanning the room for anything he could use. The warehouse was mostly empty, save for a few rusted tools on a nearby workbench and a stack of wooden crates in the corner. Marcus shifted in his seat, testing the chains loosely wrapped around his wrists. They weren't locked, just draped to give the illusion of restraint. They underestimated me, he thought, a spark of determination flaring in his chest. "Hey," Marcus called out, his voice breaking the quiet. The guards turned to him, their expressions bored. "What do you want, kid?" one of them asked, crossing his arms. "I need to use the bathroom," Marcus said, trying to sound as casual as possible. His heart pounded as he added, "Unless you want me to go right here." The guard rolled his eyes. "Figures." Kane didn't say anything about babysitting. The other guard shrugged. "Let him. Just keep your eyes on him." They approached Marcus cautiously, one of them pulling out a small knife to cut the zip tie that loosely bound his wrists. Marcus suppressed a smile. They really had underestimated him. "Don't try anything stupid," the guard warned as the zip tie snapped. He grabbed Marcus by the arm and yanked him to his feet. Marcus nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "I wouldn't dare." They led him toward the far corner of the warehouse, where a small door marked restroom stood half open. The room was dimly lit, with a single bulb flickering overhead. The stench of mildew filled the air. "You've got 2 minutes," the guard said, standing just outside the door. "Don't make me come in there." Marcus nodded, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. He quickly scanned the room, his eyes landing on a cracked mirror above a grimy sink. His reflection stared back at him, wide-eyed and scared. But there was something else there, too, determination. As quietly as he could, Marcus searched the small bathroom for anything useful. His eyes landed on the metal toilet tanklet. It was heavy, chipped, and perfect for what he needed. He lifted it slowly, careful not to make any noise, and positioned himself near the door. "Time's up, kid," the guard called from outside, his voice sharp. "Let's go." The door creaked open, and as the guard stepped in, Marcus swung the lid with all his strength. The man barely had time to react before the heavy object connected with his shoulder, sending him staggering back with a grunt of pain. Marcus didn't wait to see the outcome. He darted past the guard, sprinting toward the workbench where the tools were scattered. The second guard shouted behind him, his footsteps pounding on the concrete floor. Grabbing a wrench from the bench, Marcus whirled around, brandishing it like a weapon. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice trembling but loud enough to echo through the warehouse. The second guard slowed, raising his hands. "All right, kid. Relax. You don't want to do this." Marcus's eyes darted to the first guard, who was struggling to get up, clutching his shoulder. His gaze then shifted to the radio on the second guard's belt. If he could just grab it. Before Marcus could act, the sound of a door slamming open made everyone freeze. Heavy footsteps echoed through the warehouse, followed by Kane's cold, calculated voice. "What's going on here?" Kane demanded, his tone sharp. The guards exchanged a look, their tough exteriors crumbling under Kane's glare. "The kid. He attacked me," the first guard stammered, pointing accusingly at Marcus. Kane's eyes narrowed as he approached Marcus, who still held the wrench tightly in his hands. "Put it down, boy," Kane said, his voice calm but deadly. "You're only making this worse for yourself." "No," Marcus said, surprising even himself with the steadiness of his voice. "I'm not staying here. I didn't do anything wrong." Kane chuckled, the sound sending a shiver down Marcus's spine. "You've got spirit. I'll give you that. But spirit won't save you." He nodded toward the guards. "Take him back to the chair. Secure him this time." The guards moved toward Marcus, but just as they reached him, the faint crackle of the radio on the second guard's belt caught Marcus's attention. A voice came through, distorted but clear enough to recognize. "This is Benson. We're closing in on the target. Hold your position." Marcus's heart leapt. "They're coming." The guards froze, their faces draining of color as they processed the message. Kane, however, remained calm. He pulled a sleek pistol from his jacket and aimed it at Marcus. "Seems your friend Benson isn't as clever as he thinks," Kane said, his tone icy. "But no matter. He won't make it here in time." Marcus's mind raced. He knew Benson was on his way, but he also knew Kane wasn't bluffing. The man wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger if it meant protecting whatever secrets he was hiding. As Kane's finger tightened on the trigger, the warehouse erupted into chaos. The sound of shattering glass filled the air as a team of armed men burst through the windows, shouting commands. Flashlights cut through the dim light, illuminating every corner of the room. "Drop your weapon," one of the newcomers barked, aiming his rifle at Kane. Kane hesitated for a split second before firing a single shot toward the intruders. The bullet ricocheted off a metal beam, and the guards scrambled for cover. Marcus dropped to the floor, covering his head as chaos erupted around him. In the chaos, he felt a firm hand grab his arm and pull him to his feet. He looked up to see Mr. Benson, his face set with determination. "Run, Marcus," Benson shouted, dragging him toward the exit. Marcus didn't need to be told twice. As gunfire echoed through the warehouse, he ran as fast as his legs would carry him, his heart pounding in his chest. But even as he reached the safety of the car waiting outside, he knew this wasn't over. Kane wouldn't let him go so easily, and Marcus wasn't sure if he could run forever. The car sped away from the warehouse, its tires screeching as Marcus and Mr. Benson sat in tense silence. Marcus's hands gripped the seatbelt tightly, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. He stole a glance at Mr. Benson, whose jaw was clenched and eyes fixed on the road. "Are they following us?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. Benson shook his head. "Not yet. My team will hold them off long enough for us to get out of here." Marcus didn't feel reassured. His mind raced with questions he didn't know how to ask. "Who is that man, Kane? Why is he after me?" Benson hesitated before answering, his tone grim. "Victor Kane works for powerful people who have a lot to lose if the truth gets out. That briefcase he took contains evidence that could destroy them. But now that he's seen you, he thinks you're a loose end, someone who could connect me to the evidence." "I didn't do anything wrong," Marcus said, frustration creeping into his voice. "I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." "I know," Benson replied, glancing at him briefly. "And I promise, Marcus, I'll do everything I can to protect you. But this is bigger than you or me. Kane won't stop until he's sure you're not a threat." Marcus sank deeper into his seat, his stomach churning. "So what happens now?" We keep moving, Benson said. There's a safe location a few hours from here. We'll regroup, and I'll make sure Kane never finds you again. The journey stretched on, the night growing darker as they left the city behind. The road wound through thick forests, their shadows stretching across the car like grasping hands. Marcus tried to stay calm, but every sound, every distant car horn or rustle of leaves, made him jump. "Who are those men with you?" Marcus asked, breaking the silence. "The ones who came into the warehouse? They're part of my security team," Benson explained. "I brought them in when I realized how far Kane was willing to go. They're trained for situations like this." "And my mom?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is she safe?" Benson's expression softened. "She's fine. I had her moved to another safe house. She's worried about you, but she knows you're with me." Marcus nodded, relief washing over him. At least his mother was out of danger, for now. Hours later, they arrived at a remote cabin hidden deep in the woods. It was nothing like the sleek, safe house they had left earlier. This place was rustic, with wooden walls and a faint smell of pine. Benson led Marcus inside, where another member of his team was waiting, a tall woman with short hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "This is Agent Harper," Benson said. "She'll be staying here with us." Harper nodded at Marcus. "Glad you're okay, kid." Benson's been worried sick. Marcus managed a weak smile. "Thanks." Harper handed Benson a tablet, her expression serious. "We intercepted Kane's communications. He knows we have Marcus. It's only a matter of time before he finds this location." Benson's face darkened. "How long do we have?" "Maybe a day, maybe less," Harper replied. "He's bringing reinforcements." Marcus's stomach dropped. "Reinforcements? Like more men with guns?" Harper nodded. "Kane doesn't take chances. He'll come at us with everything he's got." Benson ran a hand through his hair, clearly deep in thought. "Then we need to be ready. Harper, start securing the perimeter. I'll set up a fallback plan." The hours that followed were a blur of preparation. Harper worked quickly, setting up surveillance cameras and tripwires around the cabin. Benson stayed inside, poring over maps and making calls to his team. Marcus tried to help, but he felt more like a burden than an asset. As the sun began to rise, exhaustion weighed heavily on Marcus's shoulders. He sat on the edge of the couch, staring out the window at the dense forest. For a moment, the world seemed quiet, peaceful even, but he knew it wouldn't last. "Marcus," Benson said, breaking him out of his thoughts, "I need you to listen to me." Marcus turned to him, sensing the urgency in his voice. "What is it?" "If anything happens," Benson said, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder, "you need to run. Don't stop, don't look back. Harper and I will handle Kane." "But," Marcus started, his voice cracking. "No buts," Benson interrupted firmly. "You've got a future ahead of you, Marcus. Don't let Kane take that away." Marcus nodded reluctantly, his chest tightening. He didn't want to leave Benson and Harper behind, but he knew they were right. Kane wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. As night fell, tension filled the cabin. Harper kept watch by the window, her rifle within arm's reach. Benson sat beside Marcus, his eyes scanning the surveillance feeds on his tablet. Then, without warning, the screen flickered. One by one, the camera feeds went dark. "They're here," Harper said, her voice calm but firm. Benson stood, his expression grim. "Marcus, get to the basement. Now." Before Marcus could move, the sound of engines filled the air, followed by the screech of tires. Bright headlights pierced through the darkness, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. And then came the first explosion. The blast shook the cabin, sending books and glassware crashing to the floor. Marcus stumbled, his ears ringing as debris rained down around him. Harper grabbed him, pulling him toward the basement door. "Go," she shouted. "Stay down there, no matter what." Marcus hesitated, fear and adrenaline coursing through his veins. He turned back to see Benson grabbing his pistol, his face set with determination. But before he could say anything, the front door burst open, and men in black tactical gear stormed inside. Marcus's heart froze as he locked eyes with the leader, Victor Kane. "Well," Kane said, a twisted smile spreading across his face. I see we've got ourselves a reunion. Victor Kane stepped into the cabin like a predator entering a cage, his sharp eyes scanning the room. He carried himself with a calm arrogance, the kind that came from always having the upper hand. Marcus froze, his instinct screaming at him to run, but his legs felt rooted to the floor. Marcus, Kane said, his voice disturbingly calm. We've been looking for you. Benson moved quickly, stepping in front of Marcus. His gun was raised, steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. Harper had already taken cover behind the overturned couch, her rifle trained on the intruders. You don't have to do this, Kane, Benson said, his voice firm. Take your men and leave. Kane chuckled, his smile widening. You're in no position to negotiate, Benson. Hand over the boy, and maybe I'll let you and your little team walk out of here alive. Not a chance, Benson said, his tone ice cold. Kane's expression darkened. He raised his hand, and one of his men stepped forward, leveling a weapon at Benson. I was hoping you'd say that, Kane said. Before Marcus could react, Harper fired. The sharp crack of her rifle echoed through the cabin, and one of Kane's men crumpled to the floor. The room erupted into chaos as gunfire filled the air. Benson grabbed Marcus and shoved him toward the basement door. Go, Benson shouted. Now. Marcus stumbled, the adrenaline pumping through his veins as he yanked open the basement door. He hesitated for a moment, looking back at Benson, who was exchanging fire with Kane's men. Harper was shouting orders, her voice barely audible over the deafening noise. Marcus, move, Benson yelled. Swallowing his fear, Marcus scrambled down the narrow wooden stairs into the darkness below. The basement was small and cold, with concrete walls and a dirt floor. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting dim light over the space. Marcus crouched behind a stack of crates, his heart pounding so loudly he thought it might drown out the gunfire above. The fight upstairs raged on, the sounds of shouting and crashing filling the air. Marcus pressed his back against the wall, clutching his knees to his chest. He felt powerless, trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Suddenly, the basement door creaked open. Marcus's breath caught in his throat as heavy footsteps descended the stairs. He peered through the gaps in the crates, his heart sinking as he saw one of Kane's men, a burly figure with a scar running down his cheek, searching the basement. Come out, kid, the man called, his voice taunting. I know you're down here. Let's make this easy, huh? Marcus bit his lip, his mind racing. He needed to stay hidden, but the man was methodically searching every corner of the basement. It was only a matter of time before he was found. The man moved closer, his flashlight cutting through the dim light. Marcus's eyes darted around, searching for anything he could use. His gaze landed on a rusted metal pipe lying on the floor nearby. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As the man rounded the stack of crates, Marcus lunged. He swung the pipe with all his strength, catching the man off guard. The flashlight clattered to the ground as the man staggered back, swearing loudly. You little, the man growled, recovering quickly. He lunged for Marcus, who barely managed to dodge out of the way. Marcus swung the pipe again, but the man caught it this time, yanking it from his hands. He grabbed Marcus by the collar, lifting him off the ground like he weighed nothing. You're coming with me, the man snarled. Let him go, a voice shouted. The man turned just as Harper appeared at the top of the stairs, her rifle aimed directly at him. She fired without hesitation, and the man crumpled to the ground, releasing Marcus as he fell. Marcus gasped, scrambling away from the body. Harper rushed down the stairs, pulling him to his feet. Are you okay? She asked, her voice urgent. Marcus nodded shakily. Yeah, I think so. Good, Harper said. We need to move. Now. Harper led Marcus back upstairs, where the scene was even more chaotic than before. 2 of Kane's men were down, but the rest were still fighting, their movements quick and calculated. Benson was pinned behind an overturned table, his gunfire keeping the attackers at bay. Kane's gone, Harper shouted to Benson as she pulled Marcus behind cover. He slipped out during the fight. Benson swore under his breath. Then he's regrouping. We need to get out of here before he comes back with more men. Harper nodded, reloading her rifle. I'll cover you. Get Marcus to the car. Benson didn't argue. He grabbed Marcus's arm and pulled him toward the back door, moving quickly and staying low. Harper's gunfire echoed behind them, keeping the remaining attackers distracted. They burst through the door into the cold night air. Benson led Marcus toward a black SUV parked just outside the cabin. Get in, he ordered, throwing open the passenger door. Marcus climbed in, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the seatbelt. Benson jumped into the driver's seat, starting the engine with a roar. The tires kicked up dirt as they sped away, leaving the cabin and the chaos behind. As the SUV sped down the winding forest road, Marcus looked back at the cabin, now just a distant glow in the rearview mirror. He felt a strange mix of relief and dread. They had escaped, but Kane wasn't finished. Not yet. Where are we going? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Somewhere safer, Benson replied, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. Kane won't stop, but neither will we. Marcus stared out the window, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The SUV roared down the dark road, its headlights cutting through the dense forest. Marcus sat stiffly in his seat, glancing at Benson, whose jaw was clenched tight. The man's focus was unshakable, but the tension in his shoulders told Marcus everything he needed to know. They were still in danger. Where are we going now? Marcus asked, his voice shaky. There's a second safe house, Benson replied without taking his eyes off the road. More secure. Kane won't find us there. Marcus nodded, though he wasn't convinced. Kane seemed to have an uncanny ability to stay one step ahead. The memory of the man's smug smile sent a chill down his spine. In the back seat, Harper reloaded her rifle, her movements quick and practiced. We bought some time, but it won't be long before they're back on our trail, she said grimly. That fight was too loud. Someone will report it. We'll make it, Benson said firmly. We have to. The road stretched endlessly ahead, and the monotony gave Marcus too much time to think. He replayed the events of the last few hours in his mind, from the chaos at the cabin to the terrifying encounter in the basement. His thoughts drifted to his mother, safe but far away. He wondered if she knew just how bad things had gotten. Marcus, Benson said, pulling him from his thoughts. You've been brave through all of this. I need you to keep that up. We're almost through the worst of it. Marcus wanted to believe him, but a gnawing doubt lingered. He stared out the window, the trees whipping past in a blur. What if we're not? What if Kane finds us again? He won't, Benson said, his tone resolute. Not this time. The confidence in Benson's voice was reassuring, but Marcus still felt uneasy. He had seen firsthand what Kane was capable of, and the man didn't seem like someone who gave up easily. Hours passed, and the SUV eventually pulled off the main road onto a narrow dirt path. The vehicle bounced over the uneven ground, the forest closing in around them. Finally, a small cabin came into view, nestled in a clearing surrounded by thick trees. This is it, Benson said, parking the car. Stay close to me. The three of them exited the SUV, their breath visible in the cold night air. Benson scanned the area, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Harper moved quickly, securing the perimeter while Benson led Marcus inside. The cabin was small but well-equipped. The windows were reinforced, and a security system blinked faintly near the door. A single room served as both a living area and a workspace, with a small kitchen tucked into the corner. It wasn't luxurious, but it felt safer than the last place. Harper, set up the cameras, Benson ordered as he locked the door behind them. We need eyes on every approach. On it, Harper replied, already unpacking a set of surveillance equipment. Marcus sank onto a worn couch, his body heavy with exhaustion. For the first time in what felt like forever, the tension in his chest began to ease. But the relief was short-lived. The faint hum of the security system suddenly went silent. Harper froze, her hands hovering over a monitor. Benson, she said sharply, her voice low. The system just went offline. Benson moved to her side, his brow furrowing as he examined the equipment. Could it be a glitch? No, Harper said. This setup doesn't glitch. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What does that mean? It means we've been found, Harper said grimly, grabbing her rifle. Before Benson could respond, the sound of an approaching vehicle shattered the quiet. The roar of an engine grew louder, accompanied by the crunch of tires on gravel. Benson moved to the window, peeking through the curtain. His face darkened. "It's them," he said. "Kane's here." Harper swore under her breath, quickly taking up a defensive position near the front door. Benson turned to Marcus, his expression serious. "We don't have much time. Marcus, listen to me carefully." Marcus nodded, his heart pounding. "What do I do?" "There's a trapdoor in the kitchen," Benson said. "It leads to a tunnel that will take you out of here. You have to go now." "I'm not leaving you," Marcus protested, his voice rising. "Marcus, you have to." Benson snapped. "This isn't up for debate. If you stay, Kane will use you against us." Tears pricked Marcus's eyes, but he nodded reluctantly. Benson pulled him into a quick hug. "You're stronger than you know, kid. Now go." Harper opened the trapdoor, revealing a dark tunnel below. "Stay low and keep moving," she instructed. "You'll come out about a mile from here. Head for the road and someone will find you." Marcus hesitated for a moment, looking back at Benson and Harper. "What about you?" "We'll hold them off," Harper said, giving him a small, reassuring smile. "Now go." As Marcus descended into the tunnel, the sounds of gunfire erupted above. The walls trembled slightly, and dust rained down from the ceiling. Marcus crawled through the narrow passage, his heart pounding with every muffled explosion. The tunnel was pitch black, and every sound seemed amplified in the silence. Marcus's hands scraped against the rough dirt, but he pushed forward, driven by the thought of escape. He couldn't let Benson and Harper's efforts be in vain. After what felt like an eternity, he saw a faint light ahead. The tunnel opened into a small clearing, the forest stretching out before him. Marcus climbed out, his legs shaking as he stood. He looked around, unsure of which direction to go. Suddenly, a rustling in the bushes made him freeze. He turned slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. A shadowy figure emerged from the trees, and Marcus's blood ran cold. It was Kane. "Well," Kane said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You've led me on quite the chase, kid. But it ends here." Marcus took a shaky step back, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear Kane's voice. The man stood tall and menacing, his sharp eyes gleaming with triumph as he took slow, deliberate steps toward Marcus. "You're a clever boy," Kane said, his tone calm but cold. "I'll give you that. But running only gets you so far." Marcus glanced around desperately, searching for any escape route, any weapon, anything he could use to defend himself. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, but there was no cover nearby, nowhere to hide. "Leave me alone," Marcus shouted, his voice trembling but defiant. Kane smirked. "I don't think you understand the position you're in. You can't outrun me, and you can't outsmart me. But if you come with me now, I might go easy on you." Marcus didn't believe him for a second. He could see the cruelty in Kane's eyes, the dangerous glint of someone who wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone in his way. He took another step back, his mind racing. "You're wasting your time," Marcus said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "I don't know anything about the briefcase." Kane's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "It's not about what you know, boy. It's about making sure you don't become a problem. Benson and his little team might be willing to risk their lives for you. But let me tell you something. They can't save you." Marcus clenched his fists, his fear slowly giving way to anger. "They already did," he said through gritted teeth. "And they'll stop you." Kane chuckled darkly. "You really believe that, don't you? How naive." Suddenly, a distant sound broke through the tension, the unmistakable roar of an engine. Marcus's eyes flicked toward the source, and hope surged through him. It was Benson's SUV, barreling down the narrow forest path, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Kane's smug expression faltered. He turned toward the sound, cursing under his breath. Marcus seized the moment, grabbing a thick branch from the ground and swinging it with all his strength. It connected with Kane's arm, making him stagger back with a growl of pain. "You little," Kane snarled, but Marcus didn't wait for him to recover. He bolted toward the oncoming SUV, his legs burning with effort. "Benson!" Marcus screamed, waving his arms wildly. The SUV skidded to a stop, and the door flew open. Harper leapt out, her rifle already aimed at Kane, who had recovered and was now stalking toward Marcus with murder in his eyes. "Get in the car," Harper shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. Marcus didn't hesitate. He dove into the back seat as Benson floored the accelerator. The SUV lurched forward, narrowly missing Kane, who jumped aside with a curse. Gunshots rang out, shattering the rear windshield, but the vehicle sped away, leaving Kane and his men behind. The drive was tense and silent, the only sound the roar of the engine and Marcus's ragged breathing. Harper kept her rifle ready, her eyes scanning the road behind them for any sign of pursuit. Benson's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his face grim. "You okay, kid?" Harper asked, glancing at Marcus. "I think so," Marcus said, his voice shaky. He was covered in dirt and trembling from adrenaline, but he was alive. "How did you find me?" "The tunnel's exit is on the map of the safe house," Benson said, his voice calm but firm. "We knew where it would lead, and we figured Kane would try to cut you off. We weren't far behind." Marcus swallowed hard. "I thought he had me. I thought it was over." "It's not over yet," Benson said, his tone heavy. "Kane's not going to stop. He's too close to what he wants, and now he knows we're desperate. This is far from finished." The SUV pulled onto a deserted stretch of highway, and Benson finally slowed down. Harper climbed into the back seat, sitting beside Marcus and handing him a bottle of water. "Drink," she said. "You need to keep your strength up." Marcus took the bottle, his hands shaking as he unscrewed the cap. "What now?" he asked after taking a sip. "Where do we go?" "We regroup," Benson said. "There's one more place we can go, but it's risky. Kane has resources, and he'll be watching every move we make. But if we can get there, we might have a chance to end this." "End it how?" Marcus asked. "You said the briefcase is gone. What can we do?" Benson hesitated, glancing at Harper before answering. "The briefcase is gone, but the evidence isn't." Marcus's eyes widened. "You mean, you have copies?" Benson nodded. "Encrypted copies, hidden in a secure location. If we can get to them, we can expose Kane and the people he works for. But it won't be easy." Harper leaned forward, her expression serious. "Kane will throw everything he has at us to stop that from happening. He's already crossed the line by targeting a kid. He won't hesitate to do worse." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He looked out the window at the endless dark road ahead, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had come so far, but the danger wasn't over. If anything, it was about to get worse. As they drove into the night, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. Kane was ruthless, relentless, and always one step ahead. But for the first time, Marcus felt something other than fear. He felt resolve. If Kane wanted to stop them, he would have to go through all of them, and Marcus wasn't planning to make it easy. The SUV rumbled down the deserted highway as the weight of what lay ahead pressed on everyone in the vehicle. Marcus sat silently in the back seat, the enormity of Benson's revelation still sinking in. Somewhere out there, hidden away, was the key to bringing Kane and his organization to justice. But reaching it wouldn't just be dangerous, it could cost them everything. "How far is this location?" Harper asked, breaking the tense silence. "About 30 miles, Benson replied, his eyes fixed on the road. "It's an old facility we used during another investigation. Completely off the grid." Marcus tightened his grip on the seatbelt. "Do you think Kane already knows about it?" Benson shook his head. "He might suspect, but he doesn't know for sure. That's our advantage." The plan seemed simple. Retrieve the encrypted evidence and get it to someone who could act on it. But nothing about this situation had been simple so far, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Kane was already 2 steps ahead. The sun began to rise, casting a pale glow over the dense forest surrounding the facility. Benson parked the SUV behind a cluster of trees, careful to keep it hidden from view. The building itself was small and nondescript, with weathered walls and overgrown vegetation, but it was built like a fortress. Thick metal doors and reinforced windows made it clear this place wasn't just any abandoned structure. "Stay close," Benson instructed as they exited the vehicle. He led the way, his gun drawn, while Harper covered their rear. Marcus followed, his heart racing with every step. They reached the front door, and Benson quickly entered a code on the keypad. The lock clicked, and the heavy door creaked open. Inside, the facility was dark and cold, the faint hum of a generator the only sound. "This way," Benson said, motioning for them to follow. The main room was small but packed with technology, monitors, servers, and secure storage units. Benson immediately began typing on a keyboard, accessing the encrypted files. Harper stood by the entrance, her rifle at the ready, while Marcus hovered nervously near Benson. "How long will it take to retrieve the files?" Marcus asked. "Not long," Benson replied, his fingers flying over the keys. "But the hard part is getting them out of here." Just as the files began to download, an alarm blared, shattering the silence. Red lights flashed, and Marcus's heart sank. "What's happening?" he shouted. "Kane," Benson said through gritted teeth. "He's here," Harper cursed, moving to the nearest window. She peered outside, her face grim. "Multiple vehicles. They're surrounding us." The sound of engines cut through the air, followed by the unmistakable click of guns being readied. Benson grabbed the hard drive containing the files and stuffed it into a protective case. "We need to hold them off," Benson said, handing the case to Marcus. "You're the fastest. There's an escape tunnel in the back. Take this and run." Marcus stared at the case in his hands, the weight of responsibility overwhelming. "But what about you?" "We'll buy you time," Harper said, her voice steady. "This is bigger than any of us. You've got what they want. Don't let them take it." Marcus hesitated, his fear paralyzing him. But Benson crouched down, looking him in the eye. "Marcus, you're the only one who can do this. You've been brave this whole time. Now, you just need to take it one step further. Trust yourself." Marcus nodded, swallowing his fear. "Okay, I'll do it." Harper led Marcus to the escape tunnel, a narrow passage that opened into the forest. "Once you're out, keep heading east. There's a safe house about 5 miles from here. You'll know it when you see it." "What about you and Benson?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. Harper gave him a small, reassuring smile. "We'll be right behind you." But Marcus knew she was lying. He saw it in her eyes. "Go," she said, pushing him toward the tunnel entrance. "Now." Marcus hesitated for only a second before sprinting into the darkness. Gunfire erupted behind him as he ran, the sound echoing through the narrow passage. Every step felt heavier than the last, but he didn't stop. The hard drive in his hands felt like it weighed a ton, but he clung to it tightly. The files were more than just evidence. They were the key to ending this nightmare. As he emerged into the forest, the gunfire grew fainter. He stumbled over roots and branches, his lungs burning, but he didn't dare slow down. Harper's words echoed in his mind. "Keep heading east. Don't stop." By the time Marcus reached the safe house, the sun was high in the sky. It was a small, unassuming building, tucked away in the trees. He collapsed onto the front steps, gasping for air. The door opened, and a man in a suit stepped out, his expression a mix of surprise and concern. "You must be Marcus," he said. "We've been expecting you." Marcus handed over the hard drive, his hands trembling. This is what they're after." The man nodded, taking the case from him. "You did good, kid. We'll take it from here." Hours later, as Marcus sat in the safe house, waiting for news, a phone rang. The man who had greeted him answered, his expression grim as he listened. When he hung up, he turned to Marcus. "Benson and Harper didn't make it," he said quietly. Marcus felt the world tilt around him. His chest tightened, and tears blurred his vision. But they said. "They knew the risks," the man said gently. "And because of them, we have what we need to bring Kane down." Marcus nodded slowly, the weight of their sacrifice settling on his shoulders. They had believed in him, trusted him to carry on what they started, and he wouldn't let them down. Weeks later, news broke of a massive criminal network being dismantled. Victor Kane was among those arrested, his empire crumbling under the weight of the evidence Benson and his team had fought so hard to protect. As Marcus watched the news from his small home, he felt a bittersweet sense of pride. He had survived. He had done his part. But the cost was high, and the scars of what he had endured would stay with him forever. Yet, in the midst of it all, Marcus knew one thing for certain. He would carry Benson and Harper's legacy forward. They had believed in him, and he wouldn't let their sacrifice be in vain. He was no longer just a scared boy from a small town. He was a survivor, and he was ready to face whatever came next.